Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the second episode of Building Our One Stack app. And in this episode, we will build the front-end part of our URL shortener app using React, Typescript, and Tailwind CSS. We will do the API integration, which we built in our first episode. So if you have missed that, then I recommend to check that out. You can just click on the card above and jump to it directly. Let me show you the demo that we are going to build in this video. So this is the application that we are going to build, and this is our front end looks like. It's not so fancy, but it's a very simple front end. And here you will see that we have the list of all the data that we have in our MongoDB database. So if I refresh my page, you will see that we make an API call and we fetch the data. So this is the data, we fetch it from the database and we display the list of the URLs that we have in our database. Here we have two call to actions. One is copy to clipboard. So if I click on it, you will see that the URL is copied. And if we go to this URL, so I'm going to copy, and if we go to the browser, if we go to the URL, then it is going to open the exact full URL that we have stored in our database. The next thing is we can also delete it. So if I delete this, then it will get deleted. Now you will see that we make an API call to delete the request. So this is the request URL is deleted and we pass the ID. Now if we want to add it again, then I'm going to go here, I will copy and I will add it here. I will just clear the console and I'm going to click on shorten URL. So as soon as I click on it, the new URL is added on top of the list. So we are also sorting the data based on the timestamp that we have in our MongoDB database. So every time the latest entry will come on top. And once a user click on it, then we are going to raise the click counts. So if we go back, then we will see that the click is now increased to 1. So we have a click counter as well. And we will also see how we can configure Tailwind CSS and how to use the Tailwind CSS classes and how we extend it. And this is the project structure that we have. We have the header, form container, footer, data table, container. So if this sounds interesting, then stick around. Also don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. So let's get started. Alright guys, so in the last video we built the backend part, and in this video we are going to build the front-end part of the application and we will complete our URL shortener app. We see here we have the client app, and now I'm going to open this client app. So what I will do is let's open a new terminal, and in the new terminal I will go to my client app. So I will have the client app. And now let's scaffold our React application. So I'm going to use VITE for that. So I will have the npm create VITE at the latest, and for the name of the project I'm going to give the name as URL shortener app. And here what we will select is, okay, let me expand this, and here we are going to select React and we are going to use React with TypeScript. So I'm going to click here. All right, I will go to the URL shortener app. Let's have the npm install, and I'm going to have the npm run dev once the dependencies are installed. So our dependencies are installed. Now let's run the project. So I'm going to have the npm run dev. Let's go to the browser. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to go to the browser and I will hit enter, and we see that our application is running on 5173. Let's go back to our Visual Studio Code, and what we have done in our server app is that we have used the URL for our client app as localhost 3000. So if we go to our server.ts, then we see that we have the HTTP localhost 3000. So let's change the port of our client app to 3000. So what we can do is we can go to the VITE, and inside the VITE we can have a server here. And whenever we start our local server, it should directly open the browser. So I'm going to have open true, and I will also give the port. So let's give a port as 3000. Now this time I'm going to close, and if I open npm run dev, all right, we see that now we have the localhost 3000. So if we go back here and if we change this to 3000, then it should work fine. So we have this. All right, and now let's go to the folder structure which we have got with our VITE app. So what I will do is I'm going to minimize this, and for this project what we have first is the VITE configuration, which is using the React plugin. So that's why we have React here. Then we added this server configuration. Now we go to the ts config. So this is the TypeScript configuration. The target is ES 2020, and we have the module as ES next, and these are some of the TypeScript configuration files, all right, which we get with the project. Then we have the ts config node, which is this one. Now, if we go to the package.json, where we have the script files, we have the dependencies, and then we have the dev dependencies. Then we have the index.html, and in the index.html, you will notice that we are having the script where we have a type as module, and then we have the main.tsx. So it's a little bit different when you do with the CRA. So this part will be a little bit different for you, but for VITE, it will be the main.tsx because it is using the type as module, and it is the ES module based dev server which VITE is using. Then we have the public folder. We only have a file, svg file. In the source, we will see that we have the VITE env devs, so nothing fancy here. Main.tsx, which is the standard index file. Then we have the reference to the app.tsx, so this is the app.tsx and have some standard code, and we have the CSS files. Alright, so this is pretty much we have it. Now to build our React application, we are going to use Tailwind for the first time. So I'm also exploring Tailwind for the first time. So let's learn the Tailwind together. So what I will do is, first let's do the setup of the Tailwind into our React project. So what I will do, let's go to the Tailwind, and we are going to have the Tailwind VITE React. So this is going to give us the install CSS. So we have all the steps here, and we will just going to follow the steps. So we have already created the project, and the next thing we need to do is install Tailwind CSS. So I'm going to copy this. Let's go to the Visual Studio Code. I will just terminate the local server, and I'm going to do the installation. So I will install this. All right, this is going to install the Tailwind CSS, post CSS, and auto prefix. So we are just following the guide which we have it on Tailwind CSS doc. Next is we need to create a Tailwind CSS configuration file. So I'm going to copy this, and this is actually going to create two config files. One will be the Tailwind config, other one will be the post css.config. Let's go, let's add it. So I'm going to go here and hit enter, and we have both the files created. So we will go here and we see post css config, tailwind config. Now the third thing which we need to do is we need to add this into our tailwind config.js. So I'm going to copy, I will minimize this, and I'm going to add the information here. So we have added this, and then the fourth step is to add this directives into the index.css. So let's copy, I will go here and let's go to the index.css, and I will just remove everything. We don't want any of the CSS, and I'm going to add it here. You will see that we have this unknown rule Tailwind CSS, but you don't need to worry about. We just need to make some changes in the VS Code settings, and then this error will go away. But we are not going to do anything, and we will keep it as it is. Then let's go, and the next step is to npm run dev, and we are going to also add this hello world. So I'm going to copy, and let's go to my app.tsx. I'm going to remove everything, and then I'm just going to copy this, and I will also remove this one. So we don't want any of the boilerplate code, so let's remove everything. And then if we go back here, then we just need to run our dev server. So let's try. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to run the dev server, and let's see. So we see that we have the hello world, and if we go and do an inspect element, then we should also be able to see that we get all the CSS from the Tailwind. Alright, so this is a very simple setup. We just followed the guide, and Tailwind is now working in our project. Now let's go and let's create some components. So the first, I will create the header and the footer component for our app. So what I will do is I'm going to go to the source. I'm going to create a folder for components. All right, and inside this, I'm going to create a header component. So let's have the header first. Then I will also create a footer, and in the header, I'm going to have the header.tsx, and we're going to use TypeScript here. So we are going to put all the extension as tsx. And for this one, I'm going to have the footer.tsx. Now let's create the header and the footer components. And one more thing I want to show you is that I am using a snippet, which is the Tailwind IntelliSense. So if I go here, and if I scroll more, then we have this Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. So that's where when I will type the class names, then I will get the suggestion. So you can also use this. It's a good extension. And the other extension which I am using is the TypeScript React code snippet, which is going to give me the code whenever I type something. So like this one, you will see that if I want to have the class component or class component skeleton, so you can see here all the details. Yeah, so you can also download it into your project so that you can know what I am trying to do here is. So first I want to create the header component, and it should be a function component. So I'm going to use Typescript RSC, which is a stateless function component, and I'm going to hit enter, and you will see that it is going to give me my header component. So I have the header component. I'm going to remove this, and now let's add the data here. So we are going to keep it a very simple, not too much fancy. So what I will do is let's create the header first. So to the header I will have a div, and I'm going to give a class name as background slate. So now if you see, if I hit space, then I will get all the suggestions for the class names. So I'm going to use the slate 8900, and this is going to give me a background color. Next I'm going to create a div. I'm going to have a class name, and I'm going to create the layout. So for that layout I will have the container, and then I'm going to have p-2. So this p is actually padding. So you will see that when I have p hyphen, it will show me the padding, and it will show the values which is going to give. So I'm going to give the padding as 2, and I'm going to have the margin x, so the margin left and right, as auto. So it is going to give me a container into the center of the screen. Then I'm going to have a nav. So let's have a nav, and to the nav I'm going to give a class name of py5. I need a padding on y5, so top and bottom padding. Then let's have a div, and to this div I'm going to give a class name, and here I'm going to have the URL shortener. All right, now let's go and let's check this first how it looks. So I'm going to go to my app.tsx, and inside the app.tsx let's remove everything, and here what I will do is I'm going to have my header component. So I will have the empty fragment, and inside the empty fragment I'm going to use the header component. So this is my header component. All right, so we get an error. So let's see what the error is. So if I scroll, then we get a TypeScript error because we needed to add the type. So what I will do is I am simply going to change this. So I'm going to remove everything. I will have the tsrsc, and then I will have my app component. Now I'm going to remove the props, and now let's just use the header. So I will have the empty fragment, and inside the empty fragment I will have my header component. All right, I will save it, and now we see that it works fine. Let's go and let's check. Then we see that we have this header, and we have this in the black color, but we need to make it into white color. So what we will do is let's go to the header, and to the header here we are going to give some more classes. So here what I will do is I'm going to give the class name as text base. All right, so this text base is actually the font size 16 pixel, and there is some line height. So I'm going to use the text base, and let's give it color, so it's text white. So that's why I like Tailwind a little bit, because I don't need to write the CSS. I already know the class's name. So if I need a white color to a text, I can just use text white instead of using the color to a font. Yeah, so I'm going to go back here, and we see that we have this URL shortener. I have zoomed the screen a little bit, so that's why it looks like this. So if I zoom out, then you will see that this is how it looks on a 100% screen. All right, let's give a little bit zoom. So next thing what we will do is we are going to have our footer as well. So let's go and let's make the footer. So I'm going to go to the footer, and it will be very easy footer, not so fancy. So I'm going to have tsrsc, which is going to give me a function component. So I have the footer. I'm going to remove the props. We don't have any props here. And here what I will do is I'm going to have a div with a class name of, let's have the background slate. It will be the same. So I'm going to give it as 900, same background. Whatever the text inside that, I need to have a white color to it, and I will have the same text base. So it will have the same font size as header. Then I want the text to be into the center, so I'm going to have text center, and I'm going to give a padding of top and bottom as 5. And inside that I will just have the copyright. I will have the copyright symbol, so ampersand #169 semicolon. Oops, this should be ampersand. All right, then I will have the URL shortener, and then I'm going to have my name. Let's go and let's check. Then we should be, oops, we don't see it because we need to import the footer as well. So let's have the footer. So I'm going to have the footer. All right, so now we see that we have the header and we also have the footer, but we don't have anything content between the header and the footer. So let's create that. So now let's create a container component which is going to have our data. So what I will do is I'm going to go here, I'm going to have the container. Now inside this I'm going to have a container.tsx. All right, let's create the component and I'm going to name it as container. All right, I will remove the props, and inside this container what I will do is I'm going to have a div and I will just simply have a container. Now we can go and check, but we need to import the container here. So let's go and let's have the container component. So we have the container. Now what we will do is inside this container we are going to create two more components, which will be the data table, which is going to contain the list of all the URLs that are in our database. And the other one component will be the form container, where we are going to have the URL shortener form. All right. So let's create the URL shortener form first. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to create a new component, which will be the form container. I'm going to create a new file, which will be form container.tsx. And let's create the component, and I'm going to name the component as form container. Oops, form container. Now on this form container, let's create the form first. So I'm going to go here, and here I'm going to create the container. So first I will have a div, and the class name for the div is, it will be having a container. All right, and I will have the max as auto, and I will also have the padding for 2. So that is going to give me the form container into the center. Now we can also use this form container into our container component. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to just remove this. Let's have an empty fragment, and inside this I'm going to have my form container. So now if we go and we don't see anything because we don't have anything in our form container. So now let's create the form first. All right, now inside this what I will do is I'm going to create another div, and let's give some class names to this div. So I'm going to use a banner image. All right, so let's see how we can give the image as a background in Tailwind CSS. So for that we need to give a background, and we need to add a banner image. So our image is already in the assets, we need to give the bg background. So to do that, what we can do is, one of the approach is we can go to Tailwind config, we can go to theme, and we can extend our theme. All right, so here what we will do is we can have a background image. So let me have a background image, and on this background image we can give a name of banner, and then we can give the URL. So the URL would be dot slash, we're going to go to the source. Inside the source we will go to assets, and then we go to background.jpg. Now this way we give the background image. Now we can just use this banner as a background. So I'm going to go here, I will have the banner. Along with the banner I will also like to give the margin top and bottom as 8, and I'm going to give the border radius, which is rounded, XL, and then we can give a background as cover. So let me have the background as cover. Let's go and let's check. If we refresh, we don't see anything because we don't have any data. Now here what I will do is I'm going to have an h2 tag, and then inside the h2 tag I'm going to have a text as URL shortener. I'm going to save, and if we go and check, then we see that we have some data, URL shortener. So let's make it a little bit nice. So I'm going to go back to the Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to give the class name here, and the class name will be the text as white. We need to give a white text. We need to have the text size, so I'm going to use the 4XL. Then we want the text to be into the center, so let's have the text center, and then we will have the padding bottom as 4. If we go, then we see we have this URL shortener. Then we will also have the other text, so I'm going to go here and I'm going to have a paragraph, and on the paragraph I'm going to have paste your untidy link to shorten it, and let's give some classes to it so that it looks nice. So I'm going to have the same text as white, then we are going to have the text center, then we will have the padding bottom as 2, we will have the text size as XL. So we're going to have a little bit smaller text size for the paragraph as compared to the heading, and then we are going to change the font extra light. All right, I will save it, and we see that we have this text. I will just change the paste and your. Next we are going to have another paragraph tag, and on this paragraph tag we are going to use free tool shorten and neat, right? And then let's give some CSS. So I'm going to have the class name, we are still going to use the font as white, text will be in the center. We will have the padding bottom as 4. We're going to have the text font size as small, and then we're going to have the font as thin. But we see that we have this image, but we want the image should have a little bit of backdrop black so that our text is more visible. So what we can do is we can actually create a div here, and I will wrap everything into that div. So I'm going to cut and put it here. And now on this, I will give some class names, and we will have a backdrop. So I want that this div should take a full width, it should take a full height, and then it should also have a rounded corners. So I'm going to have the rounded XL, and we want that this should have a padding of 20. We can have a backdrop hyphen brightness, and we can give this brightness as 50. And now if we go, then we see that this is how it looks. But we also want to change our background. We should give the background positions, or it should look properly a little bit. So what I will do is I'm going to remove the props. We have the background cover, and let's give the background to be in the center maybe. So I'm going to have the background as center. So we have this center, and now let's go. So we see that this is how it looks. Now we need to create the form where a user can put the URL, and then he can have a shortened URL. So let's go and let's create that form. So I'm going to go here, and then after the paragraph, I'm going to have a form here. Inside the form, I'm going to have a div with a class name of flex, so that we can have our input and the button side by side. Then I will have another div which will have a class name, and I'm going to use it as a relative, and let it use as a full width. Alright, and inside that I'm going to have a div with the class name of absolute, and to this div I'm going to give the text as URL shortener dot link, and I'm going to have the slash. Alright, now on this I'm going to give the input then. So let's have the input type is equals to text. Then we are going to have a placeholder, and we can have add your link as a placeholder, and we can put this field as required. Now we need to give some class names so that it looks a little bit nice. So let's have some class names here. So I'm going to use the block. We want this to be a block. We will use this as a full width. All right, I will save it. Now let's go and let's check. So we see that it looks something like this. We have this text, and then we also have a placeholder. So we need to give some padding here so that the placeholder will come here. All right, so let's go back here, and on this we have the absolute position, and let's have the inset y. So I'm going to have the inset y as 0. So this inset 0 is actually giving the top and the bottom, because we are using position absolute and position relative. Then we are going to have the start as 0, which is the inset inline start. So let me have the 0, and I'm going to use the flex. Let's have the items in the center. We're going to use the padding inline as 3, and we don't want a pointer event on that text. And then we have a text slate as 800. All right, now if we go and we see, then we still have the issue. So we need to add a CSS on the input as well. So we have this full width. We are going to give the padding as 4. Then we are going to give the text SM. We will have the text color as gray 900. So let's take the color. Then we are going to give the border. We also need to have the border color. So I will have the border gray 300. Oops, this should be border. Then we are going to have the rounded. We need the rounded corners. So this will be rounded LG. We want the background color should be white. We also want the focus. So when we click on it, the focus should be ring. Oops, the focus. So this should be focus should be ring blue. So I'm going to have 500. All right, and for the focus we have to give the border as well. So the focus border blue, and we give it as same 500. All right, I will save it. Now we see that we have all the classes for our input. Let's go and let's check. So if I go here and if I refresh, then we see that we have this still going inside. So what we can do here is that we can actually give the padding inset. So I'm going to use PS, and let's use PS as 32. Now if you see here, then we see that we have this space here, and we can use it here now. Alright, now we will also need to have a button here so that we can have a button for the shortened link. So let's create the button so that a user can submit the link. So we can go here below the input. Let's have the button, and the type of the button will be the submit. Alright, then let's give some class names to it, and then we will have a text as shorten URL. Oops, it should be URL. And for the classes, let's give the classes as absolute position. So I'm going to have the absolute position. I will have the top 0 and 0. I will have the padding as 2.5. Then I'm going to have the text size, which will be the small. Oops, it should not be start, it should be small. Then we are going to have the font medium. We need to have the height as full. Then the text color should be white, so let's have the white. Then let's give the background color to the button, which will be blue 700. So let me have the 700. We need to add the rounded. Then let's have the border, and then let's have the border color. So this will be border blue 700. Then we can have the focus ring. In the normal CSS, you write a lot of CSS by giving a class, but here each of the CSS is turned into a class name. So you don't need to write, you just need to add those class names. So I'm going to have the ring 4, and then we are going to have the focus outline and none, so that when we click on it, we don't see the button outline. And then let's have the focus ring blue 300. Alright, so we have added all the classes to our button. Now let's go and let's check. So if I go here, then we see that we have this short URL. So if I zoom out, then we should see something like this, where we can click and we see that we need to add this information. Alright, so now we have this. Now the next thing what we need to do is we need to handle this function. So let's go and handle it. So what I will do is I'm going to create a state variable. So I will have a constant, I will have a full URL, I will have the set full URL, and that will be equals to the use state, and it will be of type string, and we give the value as this one. Now we can use this full URL into our input. So if we go here, we can have the value as full URL. We can have the on change event here, and here what we will do is we are going to have an event which will be equals to the set full URL, and we are going to set the full URL as event dot target dot value. We can give the type here, so this should be react dot change event, and this is going to have the HTML input element. So I'm going to have the HTML input element. So now we have this. Now we handle the input. We will also need to have a form, and I'm going to have the on submit here. So let me have the on submit, and I'm going to have the handle submit. Now we have this handle submit, but we need to create the function for this handle submit. So let's create the function. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to have a constant, and I'm going to have the handle submit, and this will be equals to the async arrow function, where we are going to have the event as param, and this will be of type react dot form event, and we are going to have the HTML form element. Now let's go and let's write the function here. So I'm going to have the event dot prevent default, so that my page doesn't refresh whenever a user click on the short URL button. Now here what we will do is we need to have a try catch block, and here we need to make an API call to our server so that we can create the shortened link. All right, so before that, what we will do is let's go and let's create the environment files where we will have our server URL. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to click here, and then I will have the .env file, and inside the .env file what I will do is I'm going to have my VITE server URL, and our server URL is HTTP. So let's go and let's see. So if I go here, then our server URL is localhost 5001. So what I will do is I'm going to have the http //localhost 5001/API. So we have our server URL. Now I will just close this. All right, now what I will do is I'm going to create a folder into my source, which will be the helpers. So I'm going to have the helpers, and inside the helpers I'm going to create a file which will be the constants dot constant.ts. And on the constant.ts file, we will see how we can actually fetch the environment variable. So what I will do is I'm going to have the export. So I will have a name export here, which will be the server URL. This will be server. So whenever you create your React project, you usually use React app to get your environment variables. But here what we will do is we are going to use the import dot meta dot env dot our variable key, which is the VITE underscore server URL. And if we don't have this, then in that case what we will do is we are just going to use the HTTP. Actually, we are going to use the same thing. So we will have the local host colon 5001 slash API. All right. So now we have the server URL, which we can use it and make an API call. The next thing what we will do is let's go to the form container and make an Axios call. All right. So I will go down here. I will close it and let's install the Axios. So I will have the npm install Axios so that we can use the Axios. All right. Now the Axios is installed. What I will do is let's go on the top, and here what I will do is I'm going to have import Axios. All right, and I will also import the server URL. So let's have the server URL. All right, I have both Axios and server URL. Now let's go and let's have it here. So I will have the await Axios dot post. So this will be a post call. I'm going to pass the server URL. So let's have the dollar server URL slash short URL. So this is the complete endpoint for our API. All right. And with this, I will also need to pass the data. So let's have the data, and our data will be the full URL and whatever the full URL we have it here. We make the API call. We need to clean our input box. So we're going to have the set full URL as empty. And if it's an error, then in that case, what we want is we need to log the error. So I will have the console log, and I'm going to log the error. All right, so this is how we are making the Axios call to our backend, and then we are creating the short URL. So let's give a try. So what I will do is let's run this app again. So I'm going to have the npm run dev, and our app is running. And now let's try to shorten the URL. So what I will do is I'm going to use this Tailwind URL. I'm going to copy. I'm going to add it here. All right, I will go to the networks tab, and let's give a try. So I'm going to click on shorten, and we see that it's 201 created. So in a first go, we are able to successfully connect our front end to the backend, and we were able to create the short URL. So let's go and let's see what happens here. So if I go and we see that we have this short URL created, and this is the payload. And if we go to preview, this is the response. So we created this short URL and the record is stored in the database. So if I go here and if we refresh it, then we should be able to see the link of the Tailwind, and we have the record here. Now let's go back here, and if we see, then we have the input box is also cleaned. But now we have created the shortened URL, but we will also need to have a table here which will show us all the URLs where we can actually click on it and we can go. So let's create another component which will be the data table component, and we will list down all the data into our table. So what I will do is let's go back to the Visual Studio Code, and in the Visual Studio Code, let's create another component. So what I will do is I'm going to close all the unwanted stuff. I will close this config, footer, header, and app, and I will go here and create a new component which will be the data table. So I will have the data table. All right, I'm going to create a component file which will be a data table dot tsx. Oops, why has x? It should be tsx. So I'm going to rename it. Let's have it tsx. All right, I'm going to create my component, and this will be data table. All right, I'm going to remove this, and let's create the table first. So what I will do is I'm going to go here. I will have a div, then let's give a class name, and we are going to create the same container here as well, where we will have the max auto, and we are going to have the padding top as 2, and we are going to have the padding 10, bottom as 10. All right, inside this I'm going to have another div with a class name. I'm going to have a relative. All right, I will have the overflow x as auto so that we can have a scroll bar. Then I will have the shadow SM, and then I will have the SM rounded LG so that I have the borders. Alright, so I have the div. Now inside the div, let's create the table now. So I'm going to have a table element which is going to have a class name of, I want my table should have a full width. It should be a fixed, so I'm going to have a table as fixed. So these all are the Tailwind CSS classes, and if you want to see how to do the table, so we can go here, we can go and we can just quickly have it here as table. So I also did the same thing. When I went here, I go to table layout and I see that what we can give. Table layout can be an auto and fixed, and here are the examples. So it's pretty easy. Even as a first time user, I know the CSS very well, so it becomes easy for me to put the classes. Alright, so we have the table fixed. Then let's have the text size, which will be an SM. We want all the text on the left hand side, so text left. Then we want RTL, which is the direction. For that I will have the text right, and then let's give the text color, which will be the text gray 500. Now we are going to close the table and let's have the table head. So I'm going to have the T head, then I'm going to have the TR, then I will have the TH, which will have the full URL. And for the table head, we can just give some class names here. We will have the text medium. We want it to be in the uppercase. We want the text gray as 50, and then we will have the background also as gray 700. All right, so this is for our table head. Then we have the TR, and then we have the TH, and I will give the scope as column, and let's have the class name. So I'm just going to give some padding so that it looks nicer. So I will have the padding X as 6, padding Y as 3, and then I'm going to have the width as 6 by 12. Now let's do the similar thing for the other one. So I have the full URL, then I will have the short URL, then I will have the clicks, and I will have some action items on them. So I will have the action here, I will have the clicks, and I will have the short URL. We will give the same P6 and PY as the padding, and this time it is going to use the width. So we have total 12 widths, so it's going to use 6, 3, and for these two we are not going to give any width, so it will take whatever the width is available. I will save it. And then we are going to have the table body. So let's have the T body, and in the table body, let's render the array. So I'm going to have the render table data. Now let's export it. So we already have the export. Now we need to create this render table data. So I'm going to have a constant. I will have the render table data, which is equals to an arrow function, and here what we will do is we need to have the data. So maybe we will just fetch the data first, and then we will just pass the data here so that we can create the table. So what I will do is I will go to the container, and in the container we can actually fetch the data. So what I will do is I'm going to create a constant state variable. So we are going to have the data set data, which will be equals to the use state, and we need to define a type, and which is going to be an empty array. Now let's define a type. For the type we will create an interface for the type of data we are going to have. So I'm going to go here and then I'm going to create an interface. So I'm going to go to source. I will go here and I'm going to have the interface. Now let's create a file here, and the name of the file is url data.ts. And here what I will do is I'm going to have the export interface url data, and the type of our data will be, we are going to have the underscore id, which is going to be a string. Then we are going to have the full URL, which will be of type string. Then we are going to have the short URL, which will also be a type string. We are going to have the clicks of type number, and we are going to have the created at type date, and we are going to have updated at of type date. So we have this interface. Now we can just use the interface so that we can know that which type of data it will be. So we are going to use the URL data and array here. Now let's create a function which will fetch the table data. So I'm going to have the fetch table data as a function. I'm going to use the async arrow function, and it is not going to have any params. So I'm just going to remove them, and let's create a constant. I will have the response, and we need to make an Axios call. So I will have the await axios.get, and we need to give the server URL. So I'm going to use the backtick and I'm going to have the server URL here slash short URL. All right, so this is how the Axios call will look like, and then we can have a console log. So I will have the console log, and what we will do is the response from server is, and we can just see the response how it looks like. Once we also have the response, I'm going to set the data into my set data. So I will have the response dot data. Now we just need to see how we can use this fetch table data. We need to create a use effect where we can actually make a call to this. So I'm going to have the use effect. All right, and I'm going to have an arrow function inside the use effect, and here actually I can have the fetch table data, and we see that we get this data assigned but it's never used. So just to get rid of it, what we can do is we can simply have a console.log of the data. Now let's give a try. So if I refresh my page, I should be able to load the data. So I'm going here and I'm going to cancel everything. I'm going to go to inspect element. I will go to the network tab. Okay, so something is wrong. So if I go, then I need to add a empty array so that it should only call once. All right, I will go here, I will cancel this, and if I refresh it, then we should be able to see, then we see that we get the data, and in the console also we see the response from the server, which is actually this data. So we get the data. Now we need to pass this data to our data table, and let's form the table. So what I will do is let's go back here and we get this. So I'm going to remove this now, and I'm going to go here and let's have the data table, and on this data table I need to pass the data. So let's pass the data as well. Now for this data, if we go to our data table, we need to have an interface here, and we need to show what kind of data we have. So let's go here and we are going to have the data, and the type of the data will be the URL data array. Now we can use this data and then we can simply render our data table. So what we can do is so here I'm going to destructure my data. So I will have the data, and that will be from the props, and let's have the props here. So I'm going to have the props and I will save it. So we have the props now, and I can actually do a console.log, and let's see what the data in data table is, and we can have this data. Oops, this should be comma. Let's go and let's see. If I go here and if I inspect it, if I go to the console, then we see that the data in the data table is this one. We see it twice because we are having this on dev environment, we are using the strict mode. So if we go here, then we see that we have the strict mode. So in strict mode, it runs it twice. So it's not a problem. Okay, now we go and we see that we have the data. Now let's display this data. So what I will do is we need to map. So let's have a return. I have the data dot map, then we are going to get an item, and then we will again have to return the JSX from here. So we need to create the table row, then we need to have the table TD. Every row we need to give a key, so let's have a key, and we need to give the value as item dot underscore id. Let's give the class name as well. So I'm going to give the class names, and the class name will be border bottom. Then we are going to have the text as white, then we are going to have the background gray as 600. Then we need to have a hover, so whenever we hover on the table rows, we need to change the background as white, and on that, whenever we hover, we need to change the text color as well. So let's have the hover, the text color. Now the text color will change to gray, so I'm going to have the gray 800. So this is for the TR. Now for the TD, we will also need to use a link so that whenever a user click on it, it will just get redirect. So to get the link, we need to install the React Router DOM. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to have npm install React Router DOM. So this is going to give me a link. So what I can do is I can use the link from React Router DOM, and to this link I'm going to have the to, and here I will have the item dot full URL, where I will have the target as underscore blank, and I will have the rel as no referrer and no opener. Okay, so we have this link, and inside the link I'm going to have the item dot full URL. All right. And to this TD, we will also give some class names. So I have the padding right and left as 6. Then for padding top and bottom as 3. And I will have the break words. So we have this first TD, and now the next TD will be for the short URL. So I'm just going to copy and paste, and the link will be now short URL. So this will now change to short URL, and this will also get changed to short URL, but we need to form this link completely. So what I will do is I'm going to have the brackets here, and to this brackets I'm going to use the backticks, and the first will be the server URL. All right, then it will be the slash short URL slash, then it will be the short URL. So I'm going to change this to short URL. We have this. Now next will be the click. So let's have the TD. So I'm going to have the TD, and we are going to use the same classes. So I'm going to copy. We don't want the break words here, so I'm just going to remove, and we're going to add it here. We don't want the break words here, and here we will have the items dot clicks. And the last one is the action, where we are going to have two action. One will be the copy to clipboard, and the other one would be the delete. So let's have that. So I'm going to have a TD. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to have a TD here. So for now I will just keep it as blank. Let's go and let's check. So if I go here and if I refresh it, so we are not running the server, so let's run the server. So I'm going to have npm run dev, and if we go here, then we see that we have some error. So let's go and let's go to the console, and we see that we have an error here. The above error occurred in the link component, and this could be because we are now using the React router DOM, but we haven't wrapped our app component into the browser router. So let's go and let's do that. So I'm going to go to the main.tsx, and here I can actually import the browser router, and let's wrap it the app component. So now if we go and if we see, then we see that everything works, and we will also be able to see that we have this link. Now we need to have the action item for copy to clipboard, and the other one is the delete icon. So for that, what you can use is you can have this heroes icon, which is more compatible with the Tailwind CSS, and here I will use the copy clipboard. Maybe this one, you can just copy the SVG or JSX, and for the delete I'm going to use this one, which is the delete trash icon. So I'm just going to copy paste the code into my last TD so that I don't have to write it. Alright, so I have already copied the code. Now if we go and see, then we should be able to see the icons. So here you can see that we have the two icons for the copy clipboard, and then we have the delete one. And if we also see this one, then we should be able to navigate. First, let's go to the full URL. So if I click on the full URL, we see that this is the page. That's correct. If we go and click on the short URL, we still see that this was the page, which is also correct. So that means our get API is also working. So if you click on it, you will see that we go to the correct page. Now the only thing we need to do here is that we need to write two functions for the copy clipboard and the delete function. Let's go and let's do that. So I'm going to go to the Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to write two functions. One will be the copy clipboard. So I'm going to go here, and here I will write an on click. So let me have the on click, and I will write the copy to clipboard, and for this I will pass the item dot short URL. Now let's go and let's write the function. So I will also copy this, and I will go down, and I will also write the delete here. So I will have the delete URL. So let me have the delete URL, and we are going to pass the item underscore ID. Now we need to write two functions for delete URL and for the copy clipboard. Go and let's write them. So I'm going to go on the top. I will just minimize this, and then I'm going to have a constant. I will have the copy to clipboard, which is going to be an async arrow function, and it's going to take a parameter as a URL, which will be of type string. And then once we have this, we are going to use a try catch block, and let's use a wait. And for doing the copy clipboard feature, we will use the navigator dot clipboard. So they have a clipboard property, and we will use write text. and inside this write text we need to just write the server URL. So we're going to have the server URL, then we are going to have the short URL, and then we are going to have the URL, whichever URL we are passing. So now we have this copy clipboard, and once it is copied, we can also do an alert since we are not having any messages or any snack bar. So we are just putting it an alert, and in the alert we will have URL copied, and then we will just have our server URL. So I'm going to just copy this whole thing, copy, and I will paste it here. But if it's an error, then we will just console log the error. So I will have the console.log, and let's have the error. So the copy clipboard function, we have it, and if we go up and if we see it, then we should be able to have the copy clipboard. But we see that we have a problem here. On the on click, we have this type promise void is not assignable to the type mouse event handler. So for that, what we can do is to solve this error, we can just have a arrow function which will return this function, and we will be able to solve this. We also need to do it here. So we will have an arrow function here which is going to give us the delete URL. So now let's go and let's write the delete URL. So I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to have a constant delete URL, which is going to be equals to the async arrow function. We are going to have the ID, type of the ID will be a string, and then I'm going to have a constant response as a wait. Let's make an Axios call here, axios.delete, and when I delete, I need to pass the server URL. So let's have the $server URL slash short URL slash ID. So we need to pass the ID. So I'm going to have the ID here. So I will have the dollar, and I will have the ID here. So I have the ID, and then I will just simply do a console log of the response. So let's have the console log of response, and we are good to go. So we have written the copy to clipboard and also the delete. Let's give a try. So if I go here, if I refresh my page, and if I click on copy, we see that URL copied, this one. And now if I go here and if I paste it, then we see that this is the URL. And we see that URL is not found because we have something here /7d. Let's go and check what mistake we did. So if we go to the copy clipboard, then we see that we have this as extra. So I'm going to remove this. Let's give a try again. So I'm going to close this. I will refresh my page. I will copy that, and if I go here and if I paste it and if I hit, then we think we go it properly. So this works now. But we see that we have an error here. So here there is an extra bracket. So let's remove that bracket. So I'm going to remove this bracket from here. So the copy clipboard feature is working. And the last thing we need to check is the delete functionality. So I'm going to click on delete, and we are not sure whether it's deleted or not. So I'm going to refresh it, and we see that it's deleted. If we go and if we refresh it, then we see that it is also deleted from our collections. But we want the user to be notified as soon as a user deleted. So what we can do is we can just reload the data when a user is deleting. So let's go and let's do that. So I'm going to go to the Visual Studio Code, and in the container, what I can do is I can also have one more state variable which can be used for reload purpose. So I'm going to have a constant. I will have a reload, set reload, which will be equals to the react.use state that will contain a boolean, and then the value of the boolean will be false. Now what we need to do is, for some cases we need to reload our component. So what I will do is we are going to depend it on the reload. So whenever the value of the reload changes, I want the use effect to run, which is actually going to fetch the table, the updated table. So we can just pass the reload to this data table. So I'm going to have a update reload state, and then I can just pass the update reload state, and we need to create this function reload state. So I'm going to go here, and on the top I'm going to create a constant which is the upload reload state, and this is going to return a void. So it's not going to return anything, it's just going to update the state. And when we do this, we need to have a set reload, and let's reload. So we will make this as true. Okay, so we have this update reload state and we make it as true. So when this becomes true, this use effect will run again and it will fetch the updated data. So we have passed the reload state to the data table. Let's go to the data table, and to the data table we need to add it as a prop. So I will add it as a prop here. I will have the update reload state, which is a function of returning void. We have this function, and now in which case we need to call this function. So whenever we make a delete, we need to update the reload state. So I'm going to go to delete and we will just have this one. Oops, it says cannot find, so we need to have a props here. Let's restructure the prop and we have this one. The other thing is we will also need to reload the state whenever we create a new URL. So in this case also, whenever a user is submitting and a new entry is created in the database, we need to reload the table. So let's go and let's add it here as well. So I'm going to copy and I'm going to put it here. All right, let's go to the form container. I will simply going to copy this interface. I'm going to go here and I'm going to add it here. I'm simply going to copy the props as well. So copy, go here, and then I'm going to add the prop here and I will just remove this. All right, maybe the prop should be the first statement. So I'm going to cut it and put it here. And let's have a prop as an argument here. So we have this update reload state. Now let's see where we can use this. So we need to use it as soon as, so I'm going to copy this and we need to use it once we empty our input, and then we will just call this. Now we did everything what we wanted to do, and now let's give a try and test it. So I'm going to go here, copy, I will add the URL, I will click on shorten URL, and we see that we have the entry here. Let's do this as well. So I'm going to copy and I'm going to go here and I'm going to shorten the URL. So we see that we have shortened the URL, but the table is not updated this time. So what we can do is we can go and check in the database, and in the database we see that we have 2 entries. So anyway, I have to refresh it so that I can get this entry. Okay, we will check this error, but let's try to do the delete. So if I delete it, we see the entry is deleted. If I delete it again, and if I delete it again, we don't see the entry is deleted. So let's see what is wrong here. So if I go to inspect element in the console, we don't see any errors. So let's go to the Visual Studio Code, and here what we need to do is in our container, once we load the data, we need to make the reload state as false again. So we're going to copy this and we are going to add it here, and let's make this as false, so that once the data is loaded, we will make it as false, so that the next time whenever we want to reload it, we make it true and it runs again. All right, now let's go and let's test it. So I'm going to close this, I'm going to copy, I will go here and I will add it, and I'm going to click on shorten URL. We see that we have the entry. I'm going to go here, I'm going to copy, we'll add it here, and I will send. We see we have the second entry, and if we try to add one more time and if we try to do the shorten URL, you will see it will not work. And if we go and check the API data, so in the network, if I go here and if I try to send, then you will see that we get a 409 conflict, and this entry is already there. So that's why it's not allowing us to add a second entry. If we go and click here, we will be able to see the page. Let's refresh it. We see the click item is also increasing. I will refresh it. We see it's 2 now. I'm going to copy this, copy. If I go here, if I add it, and now if we see, then we see the click item is 3. Let's delete. So the delete is also working fine. But one thing I want to show you is that now if I copy this and if I add it, we see that this is the first entry. Now if I go here, I copy this, oops, I copy this again and I add it, then you see that this is the second entry. But what I want is that I always want this list to have the latest entry on the top. So it should be in a descending order. Hero icon should be on the first. So let's have one more entry. So I'm going to just open the YouTube channel. I will go to my view channel and videos, and now I'm trying to go and do this one. So if I add this, if I send it, you will see that this is the third entry, but I want this should be on the first entry. So we need to make a sorting here. So let's go to the Visual Studio Code, and this sorting will happen on the backend side. So what I will do is let's go to the server app, into the source folder. I will go to the controllers, And in the controllers, when I actually have a get all URLs, in this I have to add a sort here. So let's add a sorting here. So what I will do is I'm going to have the dot sort, and we are going to sort based on the created date. So I'm going to have the created at, and the value for the created at will be -1. Now if we go and if we refresh our page, we see the entries are getting reversed. So now let's go and let's add one more link. So maybe I will add my website link. So I'm going to copy, I will go here and I will add it, and it should be on the first entry. So I'm going to shorten, and you see that it is the first entry, and you can also delete it. So that's how we have completely built our this full stack application, where we have a front end part with React, TypeScript and Tailwind CSS, and the backend part as Node.js, Express, MongoDB and TypeScript. So that's all I have in this video. Even though the project was small, but there were a lot of learnings, and we have built end-to-end functionality from front end to back end, making the API call and integrating our backend system into the front-end application. So I hope you like the video. A thumbs up is appreciated. You can also connect with me via Facebook or Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter for latest updates. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. Thank you. Thanks for watching.